Good day to you all, and welcome to Poetry Unbound Plus. We're thrilled that you're joining us from wherever you're coming from. And I just want to extend a warm welcome to this first part of our four-part series, a collaboration between the On Being Project and the Washington National Cathedral. Our host this evening or today, wherever you are, will be Pádraig Ó Tuama, and our special guest is Mary Karr. So welcome, you found your way here, you've found the correct links, you've gotten your computer or your device on, and now we just want to orient you to a few things. But before that, I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is Ben Cott, and I am the Associate Director of Religious Life and Social Healing at the On Being Project. If you're not familiar with On Being is a nonprofit media and public life initiative pursuing deep thinking and moral imagination, social courage and joy to renew inner life, outer life, and life together. I am joining you today from my home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland. And we just want to acknowledge here at the beginning of this event that plenty of us who are here are living on lands that have histories much older than most of the current occupants' arrival. And so we want to invite you to learn about the native land you're living on, and we'll be dropping a link into the chat where you can find out more. So as people continue to arrive, just a few items to orient you to this space. We welcome you to say hello in the chat that's currently open, and you can say where you're located, including the native land if you're aware of that. We also welcome you to share any information about what you do or organizations that you're a part of that feel relevant to you being here today. My colleague Lily Benowitz from our Religious Life and Social Healing team is conducting our Zoom choreography and providing updates in the chat. Thank you, Lily. I will be walking you through some details in a moment about Zoom, but feel free to reach out to them directly if you have any questions or need help. So at the On Being Project, we use 6 grounding virtues to guide everything we do. And we're going to add those into the chat now. And we invite you to strive to embody these virtues during our time together today in the chat room and later on in the Q&A that we have. We're grateful to our friends in the social healing community who use these grounding virtues in their own work as they gather and create. And if this is your first time seeing them, please know that they're there for you to use too as you gather and other things that you are a part of. So again, we're thrilled that you're here for this first part in a 4-part series. That's a collaborative effort between our religious and spiritual life team here at On Being, between Poetry Unbound, which is our podcast hosted by Pádraig Ó Tuama, and also the Center for Prayer and Pilgrimage from the Washington National Cathedral. And so I do want to invite our partner Terry Lynn Simpson from the Center for Prayer and Pilgrimage at the National Cathedral to join us for a moment and say hello on behalf of the Washington National Cathedral. Welcome, Terry. Would you like to say hello?
Yes, sorry, I was waiting for Lily to ask me to unmute.
Oh, there we go. That helps.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Ben and Pádraig and Lily, for making this happen. I'm Terry Lynn Simpson. I'm the program coordinator for the Center for Prayer and Pilgrimage at Washington National Cathedral, for those who don't know me. And for those who don't know the center, it is a physical space, a meditation and prayer room within the cathedral, but we're also a programmatic space that lives into the mission of the cathedral to be a house of prayer for all people. So at this time, while our doors are shut and we can't be in the building, we try to be spiritually close while being physically distanced. And poetry is one of the ways that so many members of the center community find a connection to the holy and to one another. So we are particularly pleased to be co-convening this time together. And it is just very exciting to see so many familiar faces and new faces. And I am probably looking forward to this conversation more than any of you out there. So I will turn it back to Ben. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you so much, Terry Lynn. Might have to start a debate in the chat about who's the most excited about being here, but you're probably at the top of the list right now. So before I turn things over to Pádraig, I want to orient us to the Zoom space we're gathering in so that you can have the most comfortable time here. And so we do encourage you to use this space for you. First of all, to note that closed captioning is available. You can use the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window to turn this function on and off. We invite everyone to turn on your cameras and keep them on if you feel comfortable. It helps create sort of a more intimate experience as we can see one another and almost feel like we're in the same room together. We will spotlight people as they speak. So, and there's a setting called speaker view. So you can either stay in this setting or you can select the gallery view in the top right-hand corner of your Zoom screen in order to see everyone in the Zoom room. Everyone but the speakers will be muted during this event. So don't worry about that. Later in the gathering, you will have the option to ask questions of our speakers directly, and we will give you the option to unmute at that time if you are called on. And a note about that, we are having a Q&A, and this event is being recorded and posted on YouTube. So if you raise your hand and choose to participate in the Q&A, by raising your hand and asking the question, you are giving your permission to be recorded and have that shared on YouTube. So we do want you to be aware of that. And with that announcement, thank you for sitting through these announcements. We're going to turn off the chat until the Q&A later. And we do that because we want to just this evening provide focus and quiet for the conversation that we are about to witness. And before I introduce Pádraig, I just want to invite you, if you'd like, to join me in taking a deep breath and grounding ourselves. Thank you. So now I want to introduce the host of our time together, Pádraig Ó Tuama. Pádraig is a poet and public theologian. He is the former leader of Corrymeela, Ireland's oldest peace organization. And here at the On Being project, Pádraig is the host of Poetry Unbound, our podcast, and he is our resident poet and theologian. And tonight, he is the host of Poetry Unbound Plus. Welcome, Pádraig.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to Terry Lynn for the wonderful collaboration with the Washington National Cathedral, and to my colleagues Ben and Lily and Chris for the support. And before I introduce Mary, I want to thank everybody for coming along. These events happen because people gather in great warmth of heart to hear all of us share and encounter words of substance, words of meaning, words that really scrape the barrel of hunger and consider what does it mean to say something of substance from the gut of yourself. And we are in for such a beautiful conversation tonight through the lens of some of the poems of Mary Karr. I am thrilled. I think I might be the most excited about this conversation. We can totally have a conversation all together later on as to who's the most excited. So let me introduce Mary Karr. Mary Karr's books of poetry include Abacus and The Devil's Tour, Viper's Run, Sinner's Welcome, and the one that we're going to be particularly talking about tonight, Tropic of Squalor. She's the Peck Professor of Literature at Syracuse University, and her poetry has secured her fellowships from the Guggenheim, the NEA, and the Bunting Institute at Radcliffe College. She has also published best-selling memoirs, Lit, Cherry, and The Liars Club, as well as a book, The Art of Memoir, which was a New York Times bestseller. She's been twice nominated for the NBCC Awards, and her graduation speech that she gave at Syracuse, published as Now Go Out There, lit up the Twitter sphere. And she has a memoir on aging, Just You Wait, which is in progress. Mary Karr, you are so very, very welcome. It's a great joy to have you here in the room.
There I go.
There you are.
I'm clearly the most excited. I've been living in this disinfected fishbowl for a year. And other than my granddaughter, who is flat broke and illiterate and unemployed, you guys are the first humans I've seen. I really do feel like I'm blinking as I come out of the cave. Pádraig, my old friend, thank you for having me.
That's a joy. I mean, I should say your flat dot illiterate and unemployed granddaughter is what, a year and a half?
God, how do you remember that? She's
Yeah.
18. Yeah, she's 16, 17 months. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure she's thrilled that you're introducing her like that already.
She's illiterate, so she doesn't know what we're
She
saying.
doesn't know. Well, Mary, you're so well known as a memoirist, but it was my friend Nadia was visiting from the United States a few years ago. And in my kitchen, she said to me, "Do you know this poem by Mary Karr?" And I said, "I don't." And she said, "Do you know who Mary Karr is?" This must have been 8 years ago. And I said, "I do not know who Mary Karr is." And she was delighted because I had normally been the one introducing her to poets, and she'd introduced me to theologians, and then she introduced me to your work. And so I came across you through a dear friend, and you have become a friend even before there was the opportunity to meet you, because I felt like your words reached out and created a sense of connection. And I know that's the case for so many people. And while there's your work on memoir, we're not going to be talking about that tonight. It is particularly your poetry that we're going to be talking about, and especially some of the poems you've written that look at story and city and the body and life through the lenses or in some kind of conversation with the material from biblical literature. The book, the most recent book, Tropic of Squalor, published by Harper in 2018, I've got it here, you've got it too. Great.
We're ready.
It has 20 poems in a section called The Less Holy Bible. And those 20 poems each have a play on or a riff on a biblical book. Such an interesting sequence of poetry that you've written there they're titled in Roman numerals, like they're these 20 new commandments for how to survive a life. Do you want to say a little bit about that kind of sequence of poetry you included in this book first?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a prayer, as you know, and a Bible reader. I'm a church lady. I'm somebody who, an actual practicing Catholic who goes to confession and gives up things for Lent, and I read the Bible every day. I grew up in what I call the ringworm belt, the Bible belt of East Texas, and the whole Bible was so daunting, and something I liked about becoming Catholic. I mean, the Protestants do it too. We're all in the same big, wad together, as do the Jews, as does everybody. Is reading just a snippet of Bible and not having to deal with the whole massive edifice of it, getting just a little bite of it on Sundays. I mean, Catholics are famously ignorant of it. But so I read the Bible, and this particular sequence of poems, I was doing a thing where I would read a book of the Bible and then try to write out of it, or try to, so often the connection between the verse and this section of the Bible it felt when I was doing it coincident in that kind of haphazard almost.
Yeah, because they're not summaries of the narrative. Like, it's not you rewriting the narrative from a quirky point of view. It's a conversation with a narrative or a text.
It's how I felt the Holy Spirit touch me at the moment I read it. Because if you do think of it, I do feel, I guess I'm called by this Ignatian spiritual practice I've sort of been trying to do the past 20 years to you're called to see God in all things. And so as I understand that, and I don't really, but in a moment like this, I'm like, where is God in this? Like, where is God in this? And one of the things, everything that everybody has said, even the breath we all took together with young Ben, felt so magical and felt so sacred in that moment. So the connection between the poems and the Holy Scripture is like a leaning or an aroma. And yes, a conversation, but I also loved very much what you said when you were talking about early on at welcoming people out of our hunger. And that's how I I go through the world, I think, is a little
Yeah.
hungry.
I know. I mean, it's so clear in your poetry. I often feel like your poetry is written with a scalpel, and that it hurts to read and it must hurt to write, because there is a brutality of self-revelation in some of them in terms of your hunger. I'd actually really like to start at the very end, if you wouldn't mind, to start with number
Certainly.
20, Revelation, the Messenger.
Oh
And
my
if you'd read
goodness.
it, and then we'll have a conversation about that one.
Okay. Oh my goodness. At the very end, how am I not ready for this?
Because I didn't
Here it
give you
is.
the order deliberately.
Sorry. Yeah, I love being ambushed. Revelation, the messenger. It was anybody's son at the door in the dripping green slicker with an unsigned contract for selling my soul to Hollywood for a sack of gold, the mere taxes on which would have once lit my greedy eyes with cartoon dollar signs. The job was a trick I hoped to turn, having bankrupted myself on the dark, low-ceilinged box I lived in with plumbing from way before Roosevelt. And as I looked for a pen, I asked him in, and he asked to snapshot what he saw as my posh digs with battered camera from a long-lost pre-digital age. Cramming for his builder's exam, he was. The terms cornice and chair rail were enchanted spells he was proud to master. And this new messenger job, which kept him weaving between cabs and buses on this thundered day, to stand in wet helmet in my foyer, beat like hell his last, meaning his last job, hauling bags of tacos up the graffitied halls of public housing. Better wage, better tips, nicer rooms to imagine he might hammer together once he got certified. He rode off in a zigzag, dodging a bus that belched smoke. You won't believe his name was Jesus. And I'd been weeks entreating the iron gray sky to see specifically him. Oh Lord, last seen on a battered mountain bike, green wings extended behind in wind. Come back, make me rich again.
Oh, thank you. This character, you have such affection for him. You see his life and you invite him in, and then suddenly you're seeing him as an embodiment of God, some kind of angel, and the word angel means messenger. So I'm curious, what did he see when he came in, besides the cornicing and the chair rail? But what did he see, and what was the message?
Well, he had something that anybody smart has, which is he was curious. He came in to my apartment, which is tiny, by the way. I don't have it's nice. It's on the Upper East Side. It's a nice apartment, but it's not super posh and it's not vast. And he came in curious about how the space worked. And he wanted to know why I chose to place furniture as I had and what was I thinking. And I have a life mask of John Keats on the wall that looks like it's kind of coming up from the bottom of the ocean, pressing forward from through the membrane. And he wanted to know who John Keats was. And we had a great talk about him. And when I went to tip him, I said, my name is Mary, and I just have to ask you what your name is. And he said, Jesus. And I said, you're going to think I'm truly insane, but I have to tell you this. I have been praying to see Jesus all week.
Mm.
And look, here you are.
What did he say?
He busted out laughing and he said, and my mother's name is Mary.
Dear God.
And
did he tell you what his dad's name was?
Yeah, exactly. No, I assume it was, conductor of the great orchestra.
Yeah.
but also that he was, you know, New York is a city of immigrants and of the poor. And what I love about it is that you see everybody every day from everywhere. And you talk to people
Yeah.
from different countries and different walks of life. And it's just part of your normal commerce. It's not a homogenized place. But his curiosity, I was in a grumpy mood, but his curiosity sparked my curiosity. It was, I love the thing of hospitality. He welcomed me first by being curious, right?
Yeah. Because there is, you know, there's this reflection that he could be anybody's son, but somehow there is a sense that you two could become friends and almost had become friends in this moment. I feel really affectionately for him in the way that you describe him. And I find that really interesting. You're often quite brutal with yourself, Mary. Like you've described yourself in this, you know, selling your soul to Hollywood for a sack of gold.
Well, that's what I was doing.
Yeah. But I often think like you caricature yourself almost like you're a relative of Judas Iscariot writing poems. That sometimes I wonder, the speaker of your poems sounds like there's somebody there. I've heard you describe, you know, your crooked soul. I'm
Well,
curious.
you know, I think I'm somebody who identifies as a black belt sinner, who identifies as a sinner. I don't see sinning as something any of us escape. I think I don't think the Pope escapes. I don't think saints escape it. I loved, you know, I had this great priest. One of the great things he told me was, you know, if two saints to live together, they would fight. And so, I mean, I don't see sinning as breaking a rule, like, oh, your skirt's too short or your boobs are hanging out too far. I see it as making a choice to turn away from God. And I do that 100 times a day. There's a really funny text exchange between me and my actual son. When I texted him once from a subway and I said, I want to kill everybody on the 42nd Street subway. And he texted me back, you are so not a shepherd.
That was a pretty good response.
Pretty good response.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'm hard on myself. I mean, I feel, to be honest with you, kind of embarrassed by the love that I'm given. I feel like God loves me a lot, just a lot. I said a prayer this morning. I was at a dinner, which I haven't been at a dinner in more than a year, last night for the first time, and with just a very small number of friends. And I got into a terrible argument with somebody, and he was shrieking at me, and I shrieked back. And you know, I'm a savage. I think so. I don't, and on my knees that night, I was praying and I said, oh God, you know, I said to him right away, I said, I'm so sorry I shouted at you. I'm such an animal. I just am very sorry. And his wife said, he shouted first. And I said to God, you must be really sick of me. And I heard in my prayer, not at all. And is that the voice of God or just me wishing? Doesn't matter. Sure. I'll take it.
Yeah, you'll take it. What's so interesting with your poetry is when it comes to the poetry that you've written in this book, as well as in your others, you were writing as somebody from within religion, using the craft of poetics. You're phenomenally well read. You quote literary criticism. You engage with contemporary trends in poetry, and you continue to place yourself at the heart of your poems like they're prayers. There are prayers in so many of your poems. And there are so many poets contemporarily who are using biblical literature because it's good mythology, it's great stories, you know, and we'll be interviewing some folks for whom the engagement with biblical literature isn't from the point of view of a devotee, but really from the point of view of as a reader. But you're particular in this, in that you write poetry that engages with religion from inside religion. Is that awkward for you? Do you ever feel like you're...
I think it's awkward for the people who read me sometimes. I don't know. I wrote a poem in some book somewhere called about the wife of Jesus, about, how terrible it would be if he had been married, and then you had to follow him around in the desert and eat locust and whatnot, to haul all the stuff you have to haul to be when you're a girl. And where are you? Or where do they write about you? So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's plenty blasphemous, according to lots of theologians, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so much poetry, and I don't think this is accurate, but I've heard some people criticize poetry for having a detached, ironic gaze on the text. And your poetry doesn't have that. There is a vulnerability and often an absence of God in your poetry, in the sense that you're yearning for God and describing the experience of the absence of that. That when one of your poems, you're shaking your fist at God, swearing. But that's not detached irony. That's engaged hunger and vulnerability.
Well, I was because was such a pagan. I mean, neither of my parents had any faith of any kind. My father was a leftist kind of labor organizing guy, and my mother was a painter and intellectual. My mother was in this little town in Texas. They were weirdos. I thought everybody was kind of kidding about religion when I was growing up. I thought it was like the way they were about the Easter Bunny or whatever. I just, they were just going along. I didn't think they actually believed this stuff as a child. So my hunger, when I came to it, when I started trying to pray, my hunger for God and my fury for his having not presented himself in a form that I could recognize him in. I did have a candor. I had an ability to be candid with God, no matter how I felt. That I was encouraged by these savage women who were, former drug addicts and junkies and whatnot, who were trying to help me get sober and trying to just say, well, just pray. It doesn't matter what you're praying to. I'm just like, oh, don't be childish. Yeah. But don't you think there's a chip installed in everybody that's a kind of longing?
I was reading Richard Holloway's latest book, and he has a line in it where he's talking about the desire for God, and he's considering, is there a God or isn't there? And he says, what is so strange is that in this world where we're not sure, is there a God or isn't there, that there are so many of us who long for a God. And he points to that profound hunger. I found that line so moving. I couldn't get past that line when I was reading that chapter, to pay attention to the hunger that so many people have. And we call this hunger different names. And you circle around that hunger and then write from inside it too. I wonder if you could read just back one, number 19, Philemon, Notes from the Underground.
Is that how we pronounce it, Philemon? Oh, Notes from the Underground.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is my subway poem. This poem is also a love letter to New York City, I think.
Yeah.
Tonight, this subway car is permitted to bear me in its belly through a black tunnel in rock. And in the evil of my pride, I get to forget that I am you-formed. Needlework of hair stitched to my scalp, growing outward, stonework of bone, fret lines of tendon. In this dark vehicle, I sit unstrapped among other similarly shaved animals. The long light above us is sick green. The rivets holding our vehicle together are regular, the way stars are not. They foretell fuck all. I place my palms together, fingers unlit tapers, invisibly burning for you. Thirst is the truest knowledge of water.
There is such a presence of New York in a couple of these poems that we're going to look at. And I think we're specifically going to talk about New York in the next one. But I'm so interested in the word you here. I get to forget I am you formed. Who's the you there? It's such a tender word to use.
It's the beloved, it's Jesus. It's not Christ. I mean, Christ is a job title, It's but when somebody says Jesus, that's how you really make people roll their eyes. You see Jesus on a bicep or scrawled on there's a wonderful sermon by a Protestant preacher whose name escapes me. You see it written on a train overpass or something. Jesus saves or something. And it's a real eye roller, even if you're a believer. Jesus. So I think for me, Christ is hard for me to imagine. God is hard for me to imagine. But this one first century Jewish peasant who decided everybody should be nice to everybody else. And so they killed him in a really brutal way. And, we've talked about this. I think he was raped. He must have been raped because they take him into the barracks, right? The Roman soldiers, and they make sport of him. I can't remember the word. And
they take him into the praetorium. And then there's a kind of a quietness. And then it says, after they left the praetorium. And the question is what happened in the praetorium?
Why would they take him off into the barracks?
That's what they did. Yeah, horrific.
So they must have raped him. And so I think about, God in flesh and God in us, because we're such hunks of meat, aren't we, waddling around? I feel like such a hunk of meat today.
It was it was from one of your essays. You highlight that the word carne in the middle of incarnation means to be meat. And even in the description that you have here in the poem, like you describe people as, other shaved animals, but also then needlework of hair, stitched to my scalp, growing outward, stonework of bone, fret lines of tendon. I almost feel like it's the creation of the earth creature in Genesis, but suddenly being formed in the subway, in this city, hurtling along, like hoping that there's a way out from this dark tunnel. But it's so meaty, the way that you describe the human condition.
And Paul, I was thinking of Philemon. I didn't know that, how it sounds so much like filet mignon now that I think of it. But how he sort of hints in this letter that he would like to keep this slave. How do we pronounce the word? Onesimus?
Yeah, Onesimus. Yeah.
Onesimus. Almost that he's such a great guy. I'd like to keep him here to help me work on the gospel. And he doesn't say you have to free him as a slave. He says, so if you regard me as a partner, welcome him as you would me. And if he has done you any injustice, charge it to me, which is what the deal is from Jesus. If Mary yelled at the guy at the dinner party last night, charge it to me. Charge it to me. And he says he received encouragement. Is it paraklesis?
Yeah.
Which is a cognitive urge, isn't it? He received this because our hearts have been refreshed by him. But the word heart, as I understand it in translation, and you know this better than me, does it literally mean bowels? His bowels have been refreshed.
Yeah. In Greek, the center of emotion wasn't the heart; it was the bowels. Yeah. So often the English translations of the Bible tend not to refer to, God moving the bowels. They'll say God moves the heart instead, because it sounds a little bit better when you read it out at Mass.
Sounds more like John Keats. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Could be a bit awkward on a Sunday morning. Yeah. But there's such extraordinary physicality in this poem, and physicality and embodiedness and meatiness really seems to interest you greatly.
I think I'm a body person. When I was a little girl, very little, like 4, 5, 6, 7, and my daddy would come home from working all night, the graveyard shift in this oil refinery. I would walk on his back he would come in and he would say, "Oh, my aching ass." And I would say, "I will walk on your back. I don't even know where I got this idea." And I would dig my little toes under his scapular muscles. And I gave massages too to my mother and my sister. There's something about, if I hadn't been a poet, I might have been a gym teacher or a massage therapist. I can imagine those are other lives I could have imagined. Pole dancer, maybe.
Yeah. I'd like to stay with New York City and to look at number 8, Obadiah, A Perfect Mess.
Oh.
This really is a hymn of praise to all kinds of people.
Oh my
It's a
God.
very populated, and in fact, so much of your poetry is populated with people. I get to see people, some of whom you like, some of whom you don't, some of whom you admire, some of whom you read yourself against. Yours is a populated poetry.
Well, it's interesting. Well, I'll read this. Obadiah, A Perfect Mess. You know, I read this book. My friend wrote a book about partly about how if people obeyed traffic laws in New York City, the city would cease to work. So I begin with that idea, a perfect mess. Pardon me. I read somewhere that if pedestrians didn't break traffic laws to cross Times Square whenever and by whatever means possible, the whole city would grind to a halt. Cars would back up to Rhode Island, an epic gridlock not even a cat could thread through. It's not law, but the sprawl of our separate wills that keeps us all flowing. Today I loved the unprecedented gall of the piano movers, shoving a roped up baby grand up 9th Avenue before a thunderstorm. They were a grim and hefty pair, cynical as any day laborers. They knew what was coming. The instrument white lacquered, the sky bulging black as a bad water balloon, and in one pinprick instant, it burst. A downpour like a fire hose. For a few heartbeats, the whole city stalled, pauses, a heart thump. Then it all went staccato. And it was my pleasure to witness a not insignificant miracle. In one instant, every black umbrella in Hell's Kitchen opened on cue, everyone still moving. It was a scene from an unwritten opera, the sails of some vast armada. And 4 old ladies interrupted their own slow progress to accompany the piano movers, each holding what might have once been a lace parasol over the grunting men. I passed next a crowd of pastel ballerinas huddled under the corner awning, in line for an open call, stork-limbed, ankles zigzag, there's that word again, with ribbon, a few passing a lit cigarette around. The city feeds on beauty, starves for it, breeds it. Coming home after midnight to my deserted block with its famously high subway rat count, I heard a tenor exhale pure longing down the brick canyons. The steaming moon opened its mouth to guzzle from on high.
There's so much yearning in this poem, you know, the yearning to get the work done, the yearning to find a way where these guys pushing the piano can feel like people will notice their struggle. Even the kind of ironic yearning, taking in a deep drag of a cigarette, and then the yearning in the voice of the tenor as well. I heard you say that you were interested in learning in moving to write poems about joy. And I think I'd read that before I'd read this poem. And I find this poem such a celebration of joy, a joyous yearning for what community can be.
But it's also that it's not the rule, it's not the law. It's not the law that makes us be good. It's not somebody showing up with a ruler to smash everybody on the knuckles to say, bad you human beings. It is, there is a spirit. The Holy Spirit is the only is a female pronoun. It's a feminine spirit. It's a spirit of giving and love and care that's what I was thinking when we inhaled and exhaled. I was thinking, You know, we all want to be inspired. We all want to take each other in, you know, and yeah. So I was interested in that you know, Obadiah is such a it's the shortest book.
Yeah.
And it's this rage about the vengeance, but it's also says the house of Jacob will be in possession. And it winds up being this little chapter on triumph. And I feel like everybody who accommodates everybody else in New York City every day is in some way, you know, a gift from God. Not that we don't all also jostle each other and throw
Yeah.
elbows and
Shout at each other at dinner parties.
absolutely.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking of 25 years ago, somebody gave me a thank you card, and it was a thank you card that basically did all the thanking for you. All they had to do was sign their name. The inside said, I'm giving you a thank you card because in my religion, it says to me to thank people. So therefore, I'm giving you this thank you card to thank you because God told me to. And basically, they just signed their name at the end of it. I kind of wanted to hand it back and say, don't bother. Like, but partly because they were being so grateful, but the justification or the reason for it seemed so clunky. And you're speaking here about the possibility of spontaneity, almost coming back to the Jesus character in the first one, his curiosity. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to comment. What is it about this that interests you and that opens up the possibility of joy and even God?
Well, isn't it an invitation? I mean, that's been the hard part about the pandemic, is being alone in 2 rooms for a year, more than a year. I babysit my granddaughter while her mother and father work. And other than that, I mean, I have seen hardly anybody. I Zoom, I teach my students, I do what I do, so I'm very lucky. But I felt I was called into this moment in space-time. I was called to live, having lived nothing but comfort and prosperity my whole life, to look for God in this place. And we're called in New York to people here just work so hard. They work so damned hard. The guy who sells hot dogs, you know, the ballerinas, the waiters, the subway sweepers, everybody just works so darn hard. And I think that spirit, I believe, and maybe this is something I have to believe, that when I yell, that's not my real self. It's not that it's not, I know it's me. I mean, I'm responsible for it. But I had a friend once who was very upset about yelling at a child. And I said, that's not who you really are. That's not how you talk to those kids. It's not your deal. That's not really you. You know?
The theologian James Allison describes sin as an addiction to being less than ourselves.
I love that. James Allison, I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing. I'm not making notes, you know, for the test. I'm writing down people I want to read.
Well, the way that you spoke about being less than you formed made me think of that. There's beneath the kind of candor about scraping up against the edge of yourself and other people, there is within that an idea that there's an anthropology, an understanding that there is a capacity for human beings to be better than the way we are with each other sometimes. And that comes through your poetry. And I do feel like this Obadiah poem is a kind of a city hymn to ways within which spontaneous beauty and joy and something like praise is happening in the choreography between people.
And just these little old ladies with their umbrellas, noticing that these men were getting wet and stopping they were walking towards the theater district, of course. And they stopped where they were going with their bags and their nice shoes and everything to walk and hold umbrellas over these men.
Yeah, beautiful. We're going to move to some questions. I know that Ben is going to facilitate a few questions, and we're thrilled to have people in the audience. Thank you so much to folks for taking time.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for...
I know that this sold out quickly, Mary. Your voice is popular and people were really keen to have the opportunity to hear you speak about these poems and also speak to the Cathedral congregation, people that the Cathedral is
I'm
gathering.
so happy to be in the Washington Cathedral. I feel so,
Yeah.
I feel so, I don't know, humbled.
Over to you, Ben. I think you might have a few questions to offer in.
Yes, happy to jump in. So I'll just explain what this process will look like. Lily has already opened up the chat again. So if you have a question, one option is to enter it there. And so we encourage you right now to jump in, put your question in the chat. The other option as well is that you can raise your hand. So there is a raise your hand function in Zoom, and it's at the bottom of the participants panel on the far left. If we call on you, we
It's
will
on the far,
spotlight.
is it on the far right?
Oh, it is on the far right.
Under where it says reactions.
Reactions. Thank you. That's correct. So yeah, in the latest version of Zoom, it's in the reactions, and you click on that and it will say raise hand. And so if we call on you, what will happen is we'll spotlight your video and give you the option to, we'll invite you to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. And again, by raising your hand and appearing on video, you're consenting to be recorded and being on the YouTube recording. So that's the process. We probably have time for about 3 or 4 questions. And let's see here. I don't see any in the chat yet. I will change my view to see if anyone in the gallery has a question.
Maybe while we're waiting for one to come in, or has there been one that just come in? Why did you call it the Less Holy Bible, Mary? This this sequence of 20 poems in Tropic of Squalor. What was it?
Well, it's less, isn't it? It's shorter. And poetry is always shorter.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess I wanted to call attention in a sense of this is my little, almost like a prayer journal, you know, that of this period of time where I was praying. And I did have in this time, I had a religious experience in a mass in the time of this prayer where I went into mass and everybody in the mass, who I went in actively hating, they began to look like little kids to me. I don't mean that each person, I could look at it's like I could look at little Pádraig here and see exactly what you would look like if you were about 5 or 6. And it was a strange thing. So
we do have a couple questions. So I'll jump in with one for you, Mary. There is from Erica Koss, we have a question. Erica's wondering, will you share with us about your epigram from Elaine Pagels that you used for the Less Holy Bible? So maybe you could read that for everyone and then answer
sure. It's from a heretical piece of literature, of course, from the Gnostic Gospels. Jesus said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. That's kind of hardcore, isn't it? It gets back to what Pádraig and I were talking about how I believe that, you know, yes, we're born sinners and blah, blah, blah with an animal nature and et cetera, et cetera. But I also believe everybody has that spark or that hunger, that longing, and that everybody's true self is divine in some way. It is literally made by God to seek union with the force that fuses the greeny flower and with you know, I love that Blake quote, we're put on earth a little while to learn to bear the beams of love, that we just almost can't bear the love. It's so scary and big.
Thank you, Mary. So there's a few different. We don't have anyone raising their hand, which is absolutely fine. We have some more questions in the chat. There's two questions that feel like there's probably some overlap here. One would be, can you speak about your Catholic education and more recent religious influences? And I'll put alongside that, that's from Jean Duff. And then we have a question from Jessica Payne that's asking about what your prayer/wrestling process looks like. So kind of question related to, religion, spirituality in your own practice.
Well, I didn't want to be Catholic. It was a humiliating thing to have to tell people that you were not even born Catholic and you decided to become Catholic. My son told me one day he wanted to go to church, and I said, why? And he said, I want to see if God's there. And it was maybe the only sentence he could have said to get me to get up on a Sunday morning and take him to. We started something we called God-orama, where we just went to anybody we knew who had some kind of spiritual practice. We would go with them to their church or temple or Zendo or wherever. I found this beautiful little parish priest. Tobias Wolff actually took me to this little, not a renegade, not an intellectual, but an extremely humble person. We wound up both being baptized there, I think because of Father Joe. I'm writing about him now, partly about his dying. But he was, people used to say of him that he was a very holy man. All the other priests went to him, made their confessions to him, and they always asked him to say mass in the retirement home. So I had Joe, and then I also decided at some point, a friend of mine who was an Olympic swim coach had done the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius and sent 2 girls to the Olympics, one of whom gold medaled, and from this little swim club. And so I'm just such a competitive, crazy bitch that I thought, well, maybe if I do these exercises, I'll be a better writer or a better teacher, and I could beat everybody up and people will pin badges on my sash. And the purpose of those exercises is, quote unquote, to find God in all things. So I do an examination of my day. It sounds much more dire than it is, but a lot of it is trying to savor, is the word the saint uses, to savor the gifts that God sends me every day. Not to just make a list of things that at first I thought I was supposed to just, at the end of the day, say, I'm so grateful that I'm sober. I'm so grateful that I have a job, or, whatever. But I'm not really grateful for those things. I was grateful that I got a really good hot buttermilk donut. Like, I was really grateful for that. If you want to talk about what I'm grateful for, that was one of the things. And so, or I'm grateful that young messenger came to my door and touched me. And so that I saw him as a creation as an emissary of God. I thought, God sent me this FedEx dude, DHL dude.
Beautiful.
But yeah.
So another kind of area of question we have is related to your poetry writing process. So how do you form your poems? How long is the process? That's also from Jessica. And another one, though, that maybe can help answer that is there 1 or 2 poems in this group that were the most fun to write or the most challenging, and why?
Oh, they're all a nightmare to write. I just don't have a very natural talent as a writer. I'm not a particularly fluid. I don't have a generative. My friend Terrence Hayes, you just whap him upside the head and beauty falls out of his face. Me, less than that. I'm a little pit bull of a So these poems, I would read a chapter of the Bible and kind of meditate on it, and then I would try to write a poem. So normally what I do is I pray before I write and ask God to help me to tell the truth. And then sit down and just start lying as quick as I can. And so then I think, well, maybe I could make this a little less of a lie. Oh yeah, it wasn't Tuesday, was it? It was last winter. It wasn't Tuesday. It was last winter. And then I just start correcting things. So I'm a real determined little rewriter. I always joke that every poem I ever have written has started out, I am sad, the end by Mary Karr. And then I refine that every time to make it a little more specific and hopefully a little more interesting.
Thank you. So you just mentioned how you often will pray before writing a poem. There's a question here from Christopher Colmoran that's, do you feel the flow of a poem being written is very similar to prayer or similar to the internal flowing relation to God?
I don't have a flow, like it's the same thing. If you watch me write, it's just I'm not a very happy, go lucky, skibbity bibbity, kind of, it's very like I write a line, I write 3 lines, I delete 4, I write another. You get noises in your head. Like the messenger poem, I had the line, it was anybody's son at the door, but that I was calling for Jesus. And so it felt like a true beginning to that poem. I thought maybe I should start where I'm praying and trying to ask for Jesus. And I just thought, oh, everybody would hate that. So I just start in the living world where we all live instead of trying to preach like some fake holy person about how holy I am when I pray to see Jesus. It's much more like I'm just kind of lumping along and then there's a knock at the door. I don't know. There's a great story among the Jesuits that one of the great saints was too dumb to be a Jesuit. He couldn't read. I think he was illiterate. And what was his name, Pádraig? Do you remember?
I've heard the story, but I can't remember who it is.
But so they let him answer the door. They let him be the door answerer in the first Jesuit monastery. And somebody would ring the bell and he would say, "I'm coming, Lord. I'm coming, Lord." And if that could be, or Moses, "Here I am," if that could be how there's a knock at the door, I see a person, and I think, "I'm coming, Lord." Wouldn't that be a nice way what a free way. We were talking about freedom, Pádraig and I, now that it's Lent. We were talking about freedom. And what a free way to live that would be if you thought you were meeting people and that God had sent them to you.
There's a question here from Kelsey. Sorry, Kelsey. I'm looking at another one that came in related to Lent, since Mary had just mentioned Lent. The question is from Andrea Dunn, and Andrea's wondering what Lent has looked like for you in this season of pandemic. What are you taking on or fasting from?
I decided to add this Lent. I decided that I've been in a year of deprivation, and I added to my life a hot bath every night, which I used to take when my son was little and we were really broke and I wasn't able to call out and have somebody bring me a pizza. I added a hot bath to my day, and I added an extra 20 minutes of prayer in the morning to my existing 20 minutes. And it really has become much more of a place of rest for me. I also pray at night, but so I've added the amount of time. I've actually the amount of time I pray has gone up, but I'm not getting any holier. I almost came to blows with a perfectly nice man at a dinner last night.
that kind of comes in with the question that Kelsey was asking about things that in your life that contribute to your spiritual expansion, highs and lows. I suppose prayer contributes to that, but not always in a straightforward way, because sometimes you can pray and feel devastated, it seems, from the stories you say.
But you can also, I mean, the time that I had the spiritual experience, which was 2017, I was redoing the Ignatian exercises. And it was very arid, as they call it. You know, I started praying, I think, every day in September, this certain little set of prayers. And you're supposed to imagine being with yourself in these Bible scenes. So imagining being at the Nativity and imagining all this stuff. And I was having a hell of a time. I was not imagining anything. I was imagining, when can I quit sitting here? This is not happening for me, God. I was shooting the finger at the light fixture. I was saying, look, I've showed up. And sometimes I would just say, Jesus, I'm distracted and uncomfortable, and this is as close as I can be to being with you. And then a bunch of things happened. I broke up with a fella. I had surgery. It was Christmas. I was by myself. I thought I was going to be sicker, and I wasn't sick, but of course I wasn't grateful for that. I was just pissed off that I didn't have anybody to spend Christmas with. So I went to Mass by myself and conceived a towering hatred for I'd gotten there early and saved seats for a bunch of friends of mine who have a big family. And then I got squeezed out of their pew and squished into the very back next to this woman who was just stank of gin and was cussing at her husband. You son of a bitch. I mean, it was like something out of Virginia Woolf. It was like Edward Albee. It was out of Kafka. It was just so grotesque. I hated her. She had this big fur coat and these diamonds. So I was in a state of real aridity. And sometimes I think, and I started to cry in the church. And I was so embarrassed by how hard I was crying, and I couldn't leave because I was jammed in. And all this stuff is going on, and the singing, and sometimes I think in that vulnerability, in our despair, we let God in. I mean, that's the way it works for me, is if I get vulnerable enough. And I had been seeing this woman with these 3 red-haired children, and they just look like squirrels in a coffee can. I mean, that toddler, you know, is kind of crawling over the brother, and the brother was swatting at him. There are 3 little kids, and this poor woman is trying. And then suddenly everything in my perception changed in a minute. And I wasn't sobbing anymore, but I had tears pouring down my face, and everything looked different. And I looked at this little family, and I saw that they were alive, and I could see the mother as a little kid, and I saw how beautiful the children were. And then the horrible woman, I could see her as a little girl. And so it wasn't like I was like seeing an actual vision, but I could just, I don't know, it was a weird. So I think in that despair for me, sometimes in that despair, God comes in.
I'm so struck by your stickability with the spiritual way. I heard you say once that your high school principal wrote a letter to the university you were applying to, telling them not to accept you because you were a bad citizen.
I was a bad citizen.
And for a bad citizen, you make a very determined Catholic, which seems a strange thing for me.
You know what?
If I could committed.
If I still drank, or I could do heroin or methamphetamine, you know, I'd be committed to those. I mean, if I had a door number 2, Pádraig, I would go through it. If I could just go out and start robbing liquor stores, you know, it'd be fine.
And what is that determination to continue? What is that commitment? Is it desperation? Is it thirst? Is it hunger?
I think it is a real, Mr. Singh's hand is up, by the way. I'm too codependent not to mention it. But the times that I've the consolation I have received from God in prayer and through this practice, and the way my life has changed. My son said to me in the middle of the pandemic, Mom, you are really different. We talked about it, and he said, you are really different. You have really become a different kind of person. A better person. I mean, an easier to get along with person who tells you what I was like before.
It's a nice thing to hear from somebody that knows.
Nice thing to hear from your son. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious to, like, you whenever you speak about poetry, when you're giving lectures on literary criticism, you quote widely and with great recall. And I'm curious if there's a book in the Bible that's been a favorite of yours. How would you describe that from a literary criticism point of view? What would you say are the features of this? What would you say is interesting about a book? Or don't you look at it through the lens of lit criticism?
Oh, no, I absolutely do. How can I not? You know, I mean, I love the Song of Solomon, you know, where he talks about his tongue on the roof of thy mouth. You know, it's so beautiful, that eroticization of a love of God, which I identify with. And I love the Psalms, I've got to say. Of course, Jesus must have, who knows if he was literate or not, but he must have prayed the Psalms, right? But really, my favorite book, you won't be surprised, is the book of Job.
I was going to place a bet.
Really? What were you thinking? What were you thinking?
The book of Job. Yeah.
Well, isn't it well written? Isn't it well written? What's your favorite?
So what do you see in that? Oh, the book of Job. Totally. I get that from my dad. Yeah. My dad told me that his favorite book of the Bible is the book of Job. And one year for Lent, I was 20, I think, and I read a chapter of it every day, and it changed me.
Tell me how it changed you. I want to know.
I think seeing the way within which the book of Job, this epic poem, plays with the caricatures. I always think that the Lucifer character at the start of it comes in a smoking jacket made out of velvet. Like it's high camp. The setup of it is a phenomenally campy kind of piece of theater that you can imagine being played by uppity students.
Al Pacino.
Yeah. And within that, I think it's so interesting that ultimately the question of transcendence is found in looking around at the animals, a kind of an eco-poetics, and B, that the mystery of God is found in questions, that even God appears in a question. And I think that is a phenomenal artistry to do that the poem doesn't satisfy. I mean, there's that bit at the end when it says, oh, and then he had 10 more children and it was all happy. I ignored that bit.
Everybody ignores that bit, right? Yeah.
What do you like about it? What is it about that book?
It's just it's because we've all felt doomed. We've all felt doomed. I have a friend, I won't even go into, but just somebody I know trying to get sober, who I just said to the other day, maybe you're just snake bit. He's had so much bad luck. In addition to all this, and interestingly, though, I've got to say, from talking to him, he's really handled it with this amazing equanimity. And it really is a kind of power of example. And I never improve in any way on anything except through suffering and failure. I started baking in 2015. You cannot imagine the terrifying things I've drawn out of my oven. You would recoil. And it's only through making pies so sodden and soggy and sad that people would fled in horror. My doormen, when I would bring them downstairs, a slice, they would scrape it all.
Yeah, here she comes again.
Exactly. So, I mean, really, I mean, do we ever get better? Do we become better writers by succeeding? What writer, has had enormous success and then just continue to bloom past it and bloom past it and bloom past it? Very few.
That's so true. I hadn't thought about the idea of Job being looked through the lens of somebody who needed to fail and needed to fail in order to pay attention, as a kind of a mythology about that. Such an interesting idea. I'm going to hand back to Ben for a while. Ben's got a couple of announcements, and then we're going to come back to hear a final poem from you, Mary.
Great.
Thank you, Pádraig. Yeah, as Pádraig said, don't leave yet, because Mary's going to close our time with a final reading. But before that, I just want to share a few thank yous and announcements. And of course, our first biggest thank you goes to Mary Karr. Mary, you've just been so generous with us tonight. What a gift to be here. You just shared beautifully from your poetry, your stories. It just really felt like you opened up our heart, and that in turn has opened our hearts. So thank you. And Pádraig, thank you for being our host and guide, and you just hold space in such a lovely, tender way. And so thank you for, inviting us into this conversation with you. On behalf of the On Being Project and the Washington National Cathedral, a heartfelt thank you to all of you for attending and for your presence and your questions. Even if we didn't get to your questions, we really appreciate it. I want to make a note that Lily is going to add a link to a survey in the chat now, and we would love to hear from you to know what you thought of this gathering. It's a way to let our social healing team know who you are and what might serve you in this moment. We'd especially love to hear from you if you're interested in connecting with our religious and spiritual life team. So fill out that survey, and we can't wait to hear from you. In terms of YouTube, we do want to let you know that a recording of this conversation will be available on the On Being Project and the Washington National Cathedral's YouTube channels. In terms of Poetry Unbound, the podcast, we do want you to know that season 3 is coming out soon on April 26th. So you have a little bit of time to get caught up and listen to season 1 and season 2 if you are not yet familiar with this fantastic podcast. You'll find that Pádraig's reflections in that podcast very much parallel the kinds of conversation that was had here today. And finally, want to note that our next Poetry Unbound Plus conversation is Sunday, April 11, with poet David Kinloch. And you can register, you can find registration info through On Being and the Washington National Cathedral. And like all of our events, it will be available on YouTube after. So thank you for bearing with me for the announcements, and I'll hand it back to you, Pádraig.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks to Lily, and thanks to Terry Lynn. Mary, I'd love it if you could finish off with that poem. Where's it? Oh, the Wisdom. I just passed by it. Wisdom, the Voice of God, number 6.
The Voice of God. Thank you so much to everybody. Terry Lynn, Ben, Lily, the whole On Being team, and Pádraig, my brother. If I were younger and our lives had been a lot different, I would be divorced from you by now. I'm convinced. Into a soul that plots evil, wisdom does not enter. The voice of God. Somebody asked me when I pray how the voice of God sounds to me, and this is exactly almost like a transcription of some of my messages from God, kind of pieced together. 90% of what's wrong with you could be cured with a hot bath, says God through the manhole covers. But you want magic to win the lottery you never bought a ticket for. Tenderly, the monks chant, embrace the suffering. The voice never panders, offers no 5-year plan, no long-term solution, no edicts from a cloudy white beard hooked over ears. It is small and fond and local. Don't look for your initials in the geese honking overhead or to see through the glass even darkly. It says the most obvious shit, such as, put down that gun, you need a sandwich. Thank you, Pádraig. Thank you.